topic today is Tisha Bav, and I subtitled it Embracing the Sadness. And that may sound a little bit strange to some people, but that is what I am actually suggesting, and that is the trajectory in the Jewish world. It's actually a very healthy trajectory. I don't know if you're familiar with Jewish customs of mourning, or sort of say, even when like Shiva, when somebody dies and passes away, there's a very specific process. You may have observed that during our services, when we call for the mourner's Kaddish, everyone who is within that first year of their close relatives passing away, they stand up and they mourn. And so there's stages in which people mourn. And so the sadness, the letting go, the process of mourning someone is actually very organized and orderly in Jewish tradition, and I think is a very healthy one. So there's these stages through which we go, even in the cemetery, putting up a headstone at this certain time, okay? So you don't do it right away, you do it at a certain time, because what you want to progress in your personal, emotional way of letting go in a healthy way. Because a lot of people let go, but in an unhealthy way. Some can't let go at all, which is also unhealthy. So the customs of mourning, sadness, actually exist for a reason. And there's a lot of sociological and emotional reasons, psychological reasons, but there are a lot of spiritual reasons as well. Because our spirituality is tied to who we are as human beings, how God made us, and we can't deny that fact of it. So we'll talk a little bit about it today. But first of all, what is Tisha B'Av? 9th of Av, very simple answer. So everyone knows what we're talking about. Tisha B'Av is the 9th day of the Hebrew month of Av, a day that falls in the middle of the summer. Usually it falls just kind of like July, August, that time, depending on how the Jewish calendar goes. It's going to be in there. So it's that summertime, in a sense. And it is a national day of mourning, is a national day of fasting, which can be traced roughly to the 4th century CE. Historically, now I'm speaking as a historian. Now we have all sorts of data out there, but let me say that there is an account of a Roman pilgrim. He's called the Pilgrim of Bordeaux. And so it's a story of a Christian pilgrim who goes to Jerusalem on his pilgrimage, and he encounters Jews mourning the temple. And so this is how we learn from non-Jewish literature the story of, he says the Jews came to the Temple Mount, and there was a stone on Temple Mount which they actually anointed with oil and cried over. And it says that their clothes was torn. And there was a lot of crying and sobbing. And that's what he observed as a Christian pilgrim coming to Jerusalem. Now, of course, there's no temple. Everything is absolute ruins, destroyed. In fact, there was, pagan images set up on top of the temple too. But this is from a 4th century. This traveler to Jerusalem starts telling us stories, and this is what he observed. So we know the Jews have been coming to Jerusalem, most likely on the 9th of Av, to worship Hashem right there and to mourn and pray for the losses that our people have encountered. And so another source for us is actually Jerome, as he's known, Saint Jerome, the translator of the Latin Vulgate Bible. He, in his commentaries, comments. He also traveled the land extensively. You see, when Jerome undertook to translate the Bible, he didn't know Hebrew. So he relied on other people to teach him the language before he could actually translate it into Latin. He needed some help. So where he could get it? Well, in Jerusalem, of course. And so he did travel to the land. He did see it, and he also observed the customs of Jews mourning on the Temple Mount. He observed an interesting custom of Jews bribing Roman military men who were guarding the site to get up to the top of the Temple Mount because they wouldn't let them. So they would bribe the soldiers to let them come and pray right there. So he observed that custom. It was an interesting one. And he, again, Jerome, he writes these commentaries, taken for what it is. But it's another 4th century source that tells us this is how far back the custom of Tisha B'Av probably goes. So I will give you, of course, a bit of history. Now, what tragedies befell Israel on the 9th of Av? The reason why the 9th day of Av is so important, the reason why we mark it on our calendars, and it's a day of mourning and prayer and supplication. What are the types of things that happened on the 9th of Av? You guys can probably name most of them, because there's like a list of 5 really popular ones, and then there's a slew of many smaller events. But the 5 big ones, let's see. Both temples destroyed. That's a good one. So that's 2, right?
Spies gave bad report.
Spies gave bad report. Excellent. Fantastic. Anybody else remembers anything? What happened on 9th of Av?
Dispersion from Spain. Yeah.
Spain, expulsion from Spain?
Expulsion position, basically the way that expulsion started around 1492.
Yeah, exactly. 1492.
1290, expulsion from England.
Expulsion from England. So we had a number of expulsions, throughout history, and most people don't remember those because at one point or another, Jews get kicked out from somewhere. So yeah.
Is it correct to say that World War I started on the 9th of August?
It actually did. Yeah, it actually did.
Well, the final solution was introduced, right?
Yeah.
Yes, fantastic. I am getting really, really great data here. I am impressed by your memory, actually, that you remember these main points. So obviously, I have preserved them for you in this form, and so those who are watching the recording obviously will get a benefit from that. So 14th century BCE, there's an unfavorable report by the spies. Now, again, 14th century is my estimate. Some people might argue with me, but I think it was sometime around that time. That's when the spies came back, brought the report, and says, "Nah, we cannot subdue these people." And of course, you know what happened. The entire generation of Israelites died in the wilderness. 40 years in the wilderness. That got extended. So, then in the 586 BCE, the first temple, or the temple that we call the Solomon's Temple, it was robbed and destroyed by Babylon. Remember, this is when Babylonians come in. Prior to that, Assyrians come in. They don't quite make it. They don't get to invade and destroy. But Babylonians come in, and they actually do destroy the temple. So all the treasures of the temple are taken out, all the gold. There's lots of jewels. Of course, every conquering king who comes in to take the treasures of the temple, it's a lot of gold. Very tempting. So then, year 70 CE, during the first Jewish revolt, the second temple, what's called Herod's temple sometimes by people, was robbed and destroyed by Rome. So this is in the year 66, a war started. And the war started basically, well, for many reasons, but besides the fact that the Rome was coming down really hard on Jews, trying to eventually get Jews to worship in a unbecoming way. Caligula was particularly forceful with wanting to be worshipped as God. To which, like, for example, people like Philo made his embassy to him, and he said, "Look, Caesar, we pray for you every day in the temple. We bring sacrifices on your behalf in the temple every day. We pray for the well-being of you and your family." And he says, "That's not what I want. I want you to pray to me." So you can imagine how that's not going to be a negotiable point. And
The first guy asked.
yeah, not the first guy who has to do that. Yeah, so this started a war in 66 CE, which just continued raging on. Didn't quite stop for a while. Sometimes wars take a break, okay? That's really what it is. So the first Jewish revolt started. Herod's temple was destroyed in the year 70 as the result of that. Then later on, of course, Masada was taken, and you know those stories as well. There's a lot of death that happened in that time. What I want you to realize is that millions died. This was a very large population. And it wasn't just people in Jerusalem. It wasn't just Judea and Samaria. These were people dying across the entire Roman Empire, because Jews at that point lived in all the cities of the Roman Empire. And that was affecting communities there. It was a worldwide community. So then in the year 135 CE, Romans crushed the second Jewish revolt. The first revolt didn't work, so guess what? We keep fighting. More forces gathered. This time, this was known as the Bar Kokhba revolt. And during the Bar Kokhba rebellion, there was a final holdout in the fortress of Beitar, not too far off from Jerusalem. And that fortress finally fell, And guess what? That, of course, happened on the 9th of Av. All of these events happened on the 9th day of the Hebrew month of Av. So what is the coincidence, right? You realize coincidences don't really happen, and not in this magnitude especially. So, as a result, in 135 and after 135, as Emperor Hadrian took over, besides the fact that 1 million Jews were dead, all the Jews were expelled from Jerusalem, from the entire vicinity of Jerusalem. Gone. They're gone. So I want you to imagine what happened to the so-called Jerusalem church. It became Gentile overnight. Because all the Jews were literally, physically removed from the city, barred to come in and into the vicinity of the city. And so for a long time, Jews mourned these destructions by standing on the Mount of Olives. Because from the Mount of Olives you could see the top of the Temple Mount. And that has become a traditional place. But then later on, Romans did allow Jews one day a year to come and mourn the destruction of the temple. And that would have been 9th of Av. One day, people were allowed to come into the city. And that's what's most likely we're reading in the reports when we talk about those 4th century reports. That's what we're actually observing. That's the history that we're seeing. So, here's a passage from Mishnah, Ta'anit 4:6. This is what the rabbis write. It says, five matters occurred to our forefathers on the 17th of Tammuz. And 5 happened on the 9th of Av. Now, 17th of Tammuz is very important. That's another day of a mourning. Not per se a fast. It is a fast. It's a minor fast. But people don't make as big of a deal about it as 9th of Av. Exactly. So it's a smaller fast. But this will explain to you a little bit what happens. So this is straight from the rabbis. This is Mishnah, which is a 2nd, 3rd century document. So he says, on the 17th of Tammuz, the tablets were broken by Moses. So the original tablets, the first set, that when Moses sees the golden calf, he smashes. The rabbis say that happened on the 17th of Tammuz. Okay? Then on the 17th of Tammuz, the daily offering was nullified by the Romans. So when Romans basically stopped the sacrifices, that happened on the 17th of Tammuz. And it says the city walls of Jerusalem were breached. So that also happened on the 17th of Tammuz. So even, the temple sort of is still there, but at least the city walls were now breached. And then it says Apostemos, who is a Roman general, burned the Torah scroll and placed an idol in the sanctuary. And that happened all on the 17th of Tammuz, which predates the month of Av just a little bit, right? So we have that period. Yes?
I was going to say, you might point out that the 17th of Tammuz begins this period known as the 3 weeks of mourning.
Yeah. So the 3 weeks between 17th of Tammuz and 9th of Av. And that is traditionally known as 3 weeks of mourning. And obviously we observe 9th of Av with this sort of fast and self-denial as it is customary in Jewish tradition. Yet many people actually follow the custom of observing all 3 weeks of Tammuz, beginning from the 17th of Tammuz and leading into the Av as a modified lifestyle. Certain things people simply do not do during that time. Things that may sound silly to you, like getting a haircut, for example, or something like that. But that's beautifying yourself, right? That's making yourself look good. Well, people say, well, during that period, I'm not going to. Things like that. Weddings. People don't throw weddings in that period of time. Why? Because you're in the time leading up to the destruction of the temple. You do not want to take away from the memory of those tragic events. So you get the idea. The time between 17th of Tammuz and 9th of Av is a very perilous time. It historically has been. So the Torah scroll burning the idolatry. Then it goes on the 9th of Av. It was decreed upon our ancestors that they would all die in the wilderness and not enter Eretz Israel. So we've talked about that. The temple was destroyed the first time in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, and the second time by Romans. That's all in 9th of Av. Beitar was captured, and the city of Jerusalem was plowed. Now, they don't mean city of Jerusalem per se exactly, but what happened is Romans did destroy Jerusalem and rebuilt it. But more than anything, they completely obliterated everything that stood on top of the Temple Mount. So all we have today, as far as the structures go, that go from that time, is the retaining walls. So the Kotel Hamarvi, the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall, is a retaining wall of the temple. It's not a wall of the temple, it's just a base of that holds up the mountain. That's really all we have from that era. Because all the other buildings and structures were completely demolished and destroyed at that time. That's what they mean by plowing. It literally was flattened. That's what he says. Why? Because if we destroy it that completely, nobody's going to have any kind of hopes that they could kind of sort of maybe restore it and rebuild it. I mean, imagine, it's like burning the house to the ground and then rolling over with the excavator over it a few times to make sure that you can't even see where it was standing. And then later the grass will grow and you won't even know that anything was ever there. And since we kicked out all the Jews, nobody's even going to know that these people ever lived here or existed. See, there's a plan in all that, essentially. You could see what the point of this is. So it says, when the month of Av begins, one decreases the acts of rejoicing. And that's that custom of not just taking the 9th of Av, but actually going from the 17th of Tammuz and into Av, and decreasing your joy purposely. So this is the tradition, and that's a very early Jewish tradition from Mishnah that kind of tells you about the 9th of Av and why we do what we do. Now, I want to give you a few more little details that happened around the 9th of Av. Some of them did not happen on the 9th of Av. They may have happened around it. So in 1096, the First Crusade began on the 24th of Av. Okay, I don't have to tell you how many people died during the First Crusade, because as the soldiers went through Rhine Valley in France, Germany, at that time Austria, there were large Jewish communities there. Most of them were destroyed, burnt to death. A lot of them just were completely gone, and they were decimated. So
there's a man whose statue is up at the European Union in Belgium. He's something or another. And he actually said, he was in France, he said, why did we bother going to rid the Holy Land of infidels when we have all these Jews right here? And he started to grow up in France.
Yeah, we have them in our
backyard. They've erected a statue in his honor.
Wow.
Yeah. So listen, European history is full of these little factoids that I'm not going to go into. I mean, this is why you should study Jewish history for what it is, and just face the music, sort of say it's there. But, that's First Crusade, 24th of Av. In 1290, the entire Jewish community of England is expelled. That's on the 9th of Av, so we know that for sure. In 1306, Jews of France were expelled from France, and that was 10th of Av, so they were late by a day, In 1492, all the Jews were expelled from Spain on the 9th of Av again as well. And so these are kind of like smaller events. When we talk about the destruction of the temple, right, that's a big one. These seem to be not as significant as destruction of the first temple and second temple, the loss of war, things like that. But nevertheless, as you keep going throughout history, things just keep adding up on this day. So you really can't, dismiss them altogether. So I stopped right here because that's like ancient history, but now we're going to go into a little bit of modern history.
According to the Second Kings or Second Chronicles, I forget which, indicates that the destruction of the first temple took place on the 9th and on the 10th.
Right.
So it was really a 2-day event. So the fact that they got kicked out on the 10th still lines up.
The temple burned for days. The fires. Once people set fires, they don't get put out right away. So the temple actually, the destruction is an ongoing thing. We mark the 9th as the day of the fall, but we realize that there's a lot more to it. Of course. So, but this is a season. You got to understand. Days are just, letters on the calendar, right? But this is a season which we commemorate for this reason. So here's some more facts for you. In 1914, Germany initiated World War I on the 9th of Av, which after a short break continued as World War II. Well, you know what happened then? A third of the Jewish population died in that whole entire endeavor. Now, I don't even know how many Jews actually died in the First World War. I know Jews fought for Germany in the First World War. And many of them were decorated, but some of them lost their lives for Germany, which later exterminated them. So we know these these dates and these facts. In 1941, the final solution were signed by the Nazi Party on the 9th of Av.
That's when it became official.
Right. When they conceived it earlier on, the plans were laid, but when they signed, they said, okay, we're doing it. That was on the 9th of Av. Official order was signed. So, for those of you who may not know what final solution is, we're talking about complete and utter extermination of all Jews in entire Europe and any territory that Nazis could possibly get a hold of and control. And so we're talking about crematoriums now. We're not just talking about shooting a few people or hanging a few people or putting them in camps. We're talking about ending their lives, period, forever. And that's what they called final solution. Okay? That was the solution they came up with. So this is a very dark and terrible part of our history. But nevertheless, we have to know it and we have to remember it. And these types of things happened on the 9th of Av. So you can probably understand why this day is shrouded in this very ominous feelings. This is why people pray on this day like not on any other day for the safety. And I always ask people to join us to pray for the safety of Jewish communities around the world, because bad things have historically happened to us, sometimes on a very large scale, sometimes on a small scale, but you and I may never even hear those stories today. So, of course, the question is, how do we observe this day? What do we do? How do we make this day different? And there's obviously a few very, very common observances. I've summarized them for you in a very succinct way. 24-hour fast, food and drink, abstaining from a fun, joyous, and entertaining activities. That's what you do on Tisha Bav. So 25 hours. You extend it just a little bit beyond 24 hours. Personal grooming, natural and marital intimacy are set aside as well. Repentance, prayers for mercy, and reading Lamentations. Those are the kinds of things that we do on the 9th of Av to replace with our regular activities. And so if some of these things may seem like superficial, but this is just a cultural way in which Jews have historically expressed sorrow and grief. And some of these cultural ways, carry over. Obviously, what we do on Yom Kippur is not that different. But these are the customs of mourning and sorrow and sadness that people practice on Tisha B'Av. So, what do these customs of mourning seek to accomplish? That's a very important question for us to understand, because why do we do it? We know what we do, but why do we do it? And the answer is this. By embracing the memories of calamities and sadness, mourners learn how to move forward. It is emotionally healthy response to acknowledge the things that have happened to us in the past. We can't move past them as a people. We cannot move past them as individuals. If we continue to carry pain within us for something that someone has done to us, and that pain festers and it continues to be unresolved and untouched, if we bury it, it will surface sooner or later in some way. It will develop in some unhealthy fashion, okay? Just as Jews are being hated, okay? There are plenty of Jews who develop outright hatred for outsiders. We know that. That's not exactly fair. A lot of people are decent people, and they haven't done anything to Jewish people per se. But there will be that reaction that is an unhealthy reaction of complete distrust of anyone who's not Jewish, and anyone who's an outsider, anyone who could be in any way associated with them. It's that we're living in the world of us and them is what creates that sort of an emotional response to a very real trauma. So trauma has to be addressed, is what I'm trying to say. And embracing it once a year, collectively, jointly, that day of sadness, brings us to a place of healing and brings us individually and communally as an ability to move forward. It's just a healthy step. So hopefully you can understand what that does to us on an emotional level and on a spiritual level, because we must be able to forgive. I mean, remember the teachings, that in order to forgive, to be forgiven, you must forgive. If you continue to live with bitterness in your heart and you can't let it go, how can you expect to ever be cleansed? You can't. It's a very difficult thing to achieve. So on that level, what we're trying to accomplish spiritually is something actually very good for our souls, something that's good for us as whole people. A couple more things. By embracing the tragedies of the past, we also focus on the lessons that we learned from those experiences and avoid repeating them. If we forget the past, if we forget what happens, if I simply stop talking about what happened during the Crusades, if I stop talking about what happened during the Holocaust, if I don't mention the final solution, the people will forget those things and they will repeat those things. They will come up with another final solution. So we have to keep that memory fresh in order that we do not fall into the same trap. Now, for those of us who've been personally affected by these things, obviously that's not going away anywhere. But for other people, it is going away because they don't have that as a part of their family history per se. So that's a different story. So we have to hold on to these experiences in a healthy way. And it's okay to relive them periodically and to think about them so that we can move past them and realize that we're never going to be in a position to be caught off guard. When we see the warning signs, we'll know what happens. When they come to take away our freedoms and confiscate our guns, like Germany did, and then they start labeling us and marking us and putting patches in our clothes, and we know what happens next, right? Let's hope it never gets that far, right? But it has happened. And it has happened again and again and again. It has happened before. Okay, people think that the yellow stars that were sewed onto clothing was a new thing. No, it was not a new thing. It's been tried before, and even by non-Europeans. Muslims did something very, very similar in their countries as well. These are not new things. There's nothing new under the sun. But by embracing these tragedies, we are not setting ourselves up to fall into the same trap again. So it's important for us to know our history. Next point is by taking even one single day to embrace sadness and pain and sorrow, people learn how to appreciate life's blessings and joys. Think about that. I'm speaking in a very emotionally healthy way, but this is also our spiritual health. Do you know some people have a hard time being happy? The sadness that they have, whatever pain they have experienced, whatever trauma they have, even with all the things that God has done for them, they have a hard time expressing joy and happiness. They do. They continue to remain in this very gloomy dispositions. They don't know how to be happy. They don't know how to rejoice. But God commands us to be happy and to rejoice. I mean, there's a movement in Judaism that we all can learn from, okay? And there's a Hasidic group, followers of Rabbi Nachman, Breslov Hasids, who one of their teachings is, it is a mitzvah to rejoice, and to rejoice always. It is a commandment. They see this as a holy duty to be happy because we have so many good things to be happy about. Yes, we have plenty of bad things, and we will deal with them in appropriate time, in appropriate fashion. But then for the rest of our life, we're not going to be defeated. We're going to be happy and we're going to be rejoicing because God has given us so many good things. You see, there's a very healthy spirituality behind that. I'm not talking about living in denial. I'm talking about coming to terms with what happened and then moving past it and being happy. These are the lessons that Tisha Bav teaches us. The customs, the observances that we do, the traditions we practice, they exist there for a reason. They're there to guide us to be a healthy individuals, spiritually and emotionally, and hopefully physically as well. So hopefully this makes sense to us. Are there any other thoughts that you guys might have along the same lines of why we should keep Tisha B'Av, why we should observe these traditions? Anything else that comes to your mind? I just kind of always want to have an open forum. I know you guys know you can jump in anytime.
I think one of the beautiful things about Hashem is that he constantly reminds his people to remember. And remembering both the good and the bad is, I kind of like to put it in a Romans 8:28 kind of a thing, where both the good and the bad is like, Job says, if the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh, blessed be the name of the Lord. It's kind of like that. So it's very important to always remember memorials and things that has happened in the past so that you can teach your children and their children. And so
It's a
that
good
they
philosophy of
know
life. You're right. It's
how important that is.
The bad things that happen in life can sharpen us as steel.
Okay. They can. They certainly can. This is what I'm talking about. Yes, sir.
So I think this is a very difficult thing to thread the needle. If you look around here, there are no children here. So if you look back at the earlier slides and you conclude there's punishment after punishment after punishment, what kind of religion gives you punishment after punishment after punishment? I'm not saying we shouldn't remember, but you have to do it on a very careful basis because we're not alone in the world. And there are alternatives. When children, young people read this or hear about it, they say, why should I do this? Look at what's happened for 5,000 years.
Don't want to join that club.
But what I'm saying is there's an attraction out there that doesn't have
Absolutely.
this downside.
Yes.
And
Right.
it's okay for people our age to understand and remember. But it's a difficult threading of a needle to talk to a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old about this.
There's an excellent book that I wanted to recommend to you. Not an easy book to read, but definitely recommend it. Don't take everything as a gospel truth in it, but I think it's very insightful. It's written by Rabbi Kushner. It's called Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. You may have come across it. It's a very, very good book. It makes you think along the lines that actually prepares you for some of these types of questions that Ray's bringing up, especially talking to somebody who would say these kind of things. Why? Why is this happening to me? It's that joke question, essentially, right? But, also remember, that's part of it. That's just part of human experience. We live in a broken world. Yes?
Additional one of the reasons, for example, about Tisha Bav or about 17 of Tammuz is sinat chinam or hatred to each other or to your brother is the one who brought that devastation on your own people.
Yeah, there's a greater philosophy of life is what I could say that exists in Judaism. There's a size of teaching, sort of say, that, and Yosef is bringing that up. A lot of the troubles befall us is because of our own disposition towards each other. So, is God punishing us? One thing is when God punishes us for the sins committed against Him. Another time when God punishes us for the sins that we commit against each other and how we treat each other. And God has to put a stop to evil sometimes, So, yeah, we have a lot of stories like Job stories, and these philosophical questions have been posed by various religious philosophers throughout life. In fact, what if I told you there's a whole entire area of philosophy that's entitled The Odyssey, and it deals with this very question of why bad things happen to good people. There's a whole entire area of philosophy, and you could read books and books and books on this level. There's been a lot of studies have been done. I'm just trying to digest it to a very simple ideas. Yes?
The thing, though, that did speak a little bit to that question, because I'm familiar with the holiday, and I'm familiar with Jewish history.
Yes.
Very much personally, but never heard about it celebrated and remembering all these bad things, but never in the sense of we remember to mourn so that we can forgive and be healed and remember all the blessings and joys. And when you were talking about Moses standing up there and, okay, you can look, and the garage too, and then I remember then he dies. And I wonder, right after he dies, if Dan's in God's presence. You know what? Because you said God's enough. Being in the land is not so important.
All of a sudden, that's not the biggest prize.
Because he was faithful to the Lord.
Exactly.
And he is now in his presence. And And so God is enough. And though I just don't want, I'm not that brave, and I don't like pain and trauma. But we want to have a nice, good life here. It's very difficult to really, it's good to say it and believe it, but when
Right.
you're in that spot and it hurts, it just really hurts. And our people have been through so much, and I'm real glad my grandparents came here when they did. But to hold on to that truth, like to be joyful always, to pray without ceasing, give thanks in all circumstances, to remember the blessing and joys, that's a gift that we can hold on to
Yep.
and have that.
It's the strength.
Yeah.
It's the strength. It's understanding where our strength comes from. It's very important. Again, like I said, it is having the full philosophy of Jewish life is really that helps us to answer these questions and be more equipped. Because if we just look at particular instances and pick them out little by little, then they don't quite paint a very good picture. When we look at the big picture, we realize that actually what we have is a much healthier situation than many people do. Who just pretend to live in denial. There are better religions out there in the sense that they don't demand of people much, and they promise some of the same benefits.
So, what everybody said, it's put me in mind of several things, but you'd asked about why should we do this? Well, we're committed, so remember, that's what we're over and over and over and over about everything, so we need to remember. Secondly, two of the biggest things that happened on this day were the destruction of each the Beit HaMikdash. And that was where God, like he did before in the tabernacle, he had set a place where he would come to meet with us on this earth. And that was the place that he chose.
That's what I wanted.
And so the fact that that was destroyed, the place where he would meet with us, is a true cause for mourning. In and of itself. And then times two, and then all these other tragedies that have befallen us. And I agree with Ray that we can't only focus on the negative, especially for young. You've got to show hope. But, when I was growing up, and we were talking about my Jewish heritage and my grandmother, it only looked dark to me. And so I said, why would I want to be this if everybody wants to kill me? And she said, I don't want it. She said, you don't have a choice. Because every time you try to pretend you're not, somebody's going to remind you that you are. And so there's going to, these things that keep happening. There were many people who were in churches or not observant in Europe during World War II. They went to Auschwitz on the trains too.
Absolutely.
So you can try to forget that you're a Jew or not accept the Judaism, but it's dangerous. So I do agree we've got to show the benefits as well.
Right, the
to being a
benefits,
Jew,
yeah.
not just the parts that you wish didn't exist.
Yeah, and that's really important. So you brought up the temple, and that's actually a very, very important feature. What I want you to realize is part of the reason why we continue to mourn is the fact that Hashem did command the temple. And all these sacrifices every year that we read through the Torah, all of these things, these are things he wanted. This is his will. When we pray, your will be done, this is what we're talking about, by the way. That is his will. It expressed in a very clear words. That's what he wants. We lost that. And our worship will never be complete until we regain it. What we do here is nice. All of the customs and rituals and cultural ways in which we learn how to express our spirituality before God, they're wonderful. But that's not what he really wanted. What he really wanted was the temple. One day will be restored. I believe it. I believe it wholeheartedly because he said it would. So I have to take God for his word because so far he hasn't failed me on anything. So maybe not in my generation, but it will.
Yeah. As a non-Jew, I look at the fact the temple was destroyed, and I look at my non-Jewish counterparts, and my sense is that non-Jews don't really appreciate the loss of the temple. I was talking to Brad about this earlier this week, and I was on, I participated in Aleph Beta's big gathering they had, their virtual meeting on Zoom, and they had so many people. I mean, you had to scroll through 18 screens to see all of the names and the faces of people out there. And I told them, just looking through it, I could tell probably 90% of them were Jewish. Maybe 10% were non-Jewish. But yet half of their body, half of their members, I'm told, are non-Jews.
Right.
I'm like, where are they?
Where are those people?
Where are those people? I mean, if any non-Jews would participate, it would be that group. But even they weren't there. And I was telling Brad, I said, it's like the world needs to understand that the entire world lost a treasure when the temple was destroyed. And if the whole world would embrace Tisha B'Av and lament with the Jewish people, we'd be celebrating on Tisha B'Av, because then there would be a temple.
We would be. So here's my slide. What about non-Jews? Should they commemorate the 9th of Av? Fast. I mean, that's a question that I kind of knew that was going to show up one way, form, or shape anyway. And my answer is this, that those who tangibly bind themselves in their worship and life with Israel, those who can call themselves like sojourners in the Torah, that's what we read, they should share the communal sadness with Israel because they are part of the community. What hurts us hurts everybody else who has tied their lives to us and to our God, because we're in this together. And my answer is absolutely yes. I wish that would be more the case. And that was a very good example that you gave us, David. I appreciate that. I have to say that because we live in a broken world, human life is plenty of suffering, pain, and sadness. Now, because the world was created by Hashem, even sorrow can turn into joy. The day of someone's death is the day of someone's birth. Think about it that way. This is the reality of life. We always focus again on ourselves. We can have a pity party with what's happening, but sometimes that's because we look at us. Yes, the day of my death will be a day of somebody else's birth. And that's pretty amazing. Yeah, sunrise, sunset. Thank you for saying that. I love that. So there's something I wanted to bring up for you. There's a Gemara commentary on Berachot 2:4. If you're interested, look it up. It's a little quirky passage, a little bit interesting, but it actually is a long story that suggests that Messiah will be born on Tisha B'Av. You know why? To undo everything that happened. Because Tisha B'Av has so much sadness that day has to be redeemed. And it says the Messiah will be born on Tisha B'Av. It's a very interesting tradition. Look it up if you get a chance. Berachot 2:4, and specifically the commentary, the Talmudic commentary on that Mishnah, is where I find that tradition. Messiah is born on Tisha B'Av. I'm like, okay, that's a good one. I'm going to bring something else for you guys because the time is running out. I wanted to share one more tidbit with you. Now, Yeshua fasted in the wilderness of Zin for 40 days. We read this passage in the book of Matthew. Perhaps you remember that. When the accuser tempted him and suggested that he turn the rocks into bread, he answered, "Man shall not live by bread alone." Okay? And that passage right there comes from Parshat Ekev, which we're reading next week. When he was told to jump so that the angels would catch him, he answered, "Do not put the Lord your God to the test." That comes from Deuteronomy 6:16. That's a direct quote. It comes from Parsha Vayetchanan, which we're reading right now. Today is when we complete this cycle. And it says, when he was offered the kingdoms of the world, as if only who would just bow to the tempter, he answered, "Worship the Lord your God and serve him alone." And guess what? That also comes from Deuteronomy 6:13 from Vayetchanan. So what if I was to suggest a very crazy idea to you? And I first learned this from Rabbi Rosenberg in New York. He told me he believed that Yeshua fasted and prayed in the wilderness of Zin, and it corresponded to the 9th of Av. Because the portions of the scripture which we quoted in response to the accuser all come from the very parsha upon which we meditate when the 9th of Av occurs. It's like his bar mitzvah portion or something. We don't exactly. So remember, if Messiah is born on Tisha B'Av, then he would have studied Vayetchanan and Ekev, and that's what he would have. You get the idea. It's a beautiful tradition. I didn't come up with it by myself. Like I said, totally giving credit. Rabbi Rosenberg first showed this to me, and I said, "This is interesting. Let me look deeper into it." And yeah, sure it is. I saw some hands over there in the back. Yeah, Linda, go ahead.
What you just shared really deepens the profundity of him weeping over Jerusalem. That the arc of his life to come to that point, knowing where his ministry began, and you wouldn't listen. Shema.
Right.
But you wouldn't.
Not ready to listen. Yes, Simona.
To the question if Gentiles should observe these fast days, I think they happen for the Gentiles. These tragedies happen because they're proof of God's existence. To anybody that opens their eyes to see what's going on in the world, this is proof that if God chose a nation, gave its laws, if you don't obey, there's consequences. And that's partly why they happen. On a positive note, even when they do happen, we have that promise in Zechariah that the fast days will be transformed into joy.
Yes.
So that's...
Yes, Zechariah is a great verses to read. So I obviously wanted you to know that. But here's a passage where I went this week, actually, as I was thinking about these passages. I went to Jeremiah 31, and here the words are this: "Hear the word of the Lord, our nations, and declare the coastlands far off, and say, he who scattered Israel will gather him, and keep him as a shepherd keeps his flock." Sounds familiar, right? "For the Lord has ransomed Jacob and redeemed him from the land of him who is stronger than he." Hasn't that been the story of our lives? "They will come and shout for joy on the height of Zion, and they will be radiant over the bounty of the Lord, over the grain and the new wine and the oil, and over the young and the flock and the herd, and their life will be like watered garden, and they will never languish again. Then the virgin will rejoice in the dance, and the young men and the old together, for I will turn their mourning into joy." And that's what I want you to remember about Tisha B'Av. Because while we are in mourning, we have a promise that God will take that sadness and turn it into joy. All these things. Now, people who don't believe in the Olam Haba, people who don't believe in the coming of the Mashiach, it's hard. It's hard for them to have some kind of a faith that would lead them to this type of positivity, right? But if we believe that these days are yet to come, that restoration is at hand, if we believe that we're living in these very moments when things are being fulfilled, then we can look happily for these moments of joy because they're right around the corner. So I'll leave you with that because my time is run out.